Alright guys, TacticalRab back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. And after one of the best rookie seasons we have seen in recent memory, Pred of the Seattle Surge will of course be staying on their roster for next season. But he's come up with his tier list of SMG players in the league, putting many big names, Scump, Simp, aBeZy, all these guys up in the A tier. But only one man finds himself in the S tier. Just goes to show how highly a lot of the pros rate Shotzzy's performance and his impact on the map. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you are new as always. I'd greatly appreciate it. It really helps out the channel. Thank you very much indeed for doing that one. Plenty to discuss this evening. First of all, this real quick. Earlier today we did talk about Modern Warfare 2. There's some sort of countdown video going on here where, you know, the game is going to get revealed to a greater extent in just a few days' time. But actually in this video itself, people were looking at, okay, some of the artifacts in the background effectively. We saw earlier today, okay, could this be capture the flag? Could that be domination? Stuff like this. Now, apparently there's also in the bottom right-hand side some talk on what might be the potential perks for the game. There's been some talk about the perk system is not maybe going to be quite the same as it has been recently. It's going to be kind of like you pick maybe 4 perks or something and from different categories. I don't exactly know what's going on. I wish just pick 10 would come back, or like pick 13 maybe as it was back in Advanced Warfare, something like that, but it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. They've got to align it with the Warzone stuff. But yeah, Ghost of Hope, everyone's been looking into this to try and figure out what might be going on, and there's been some leaks as to potential perks for next year's game. I'm not sure Dead Silence has been talked about yet, but hopefully that'll be the case. I'd be surprised if they don't right. At least Vanguard did get that part right with the ninja perk, plus also like I suppose the full Dead Silence additional kind of a, whatever they call it, field upgrade or field attribute or whatever is going on there. Speaking of OpTic, I thought this is kind of crazy actually. Like we did here or we did, I have no idea how to pronounce a load of the Valorant player names, but this guy pretty well known name in the Valorant side, and I thought this is interesting actually that he says whoever Dashpack is actually the GOAT, right? So I guess he's been playing Dashy a fair bit in like Valorant ranked, and Dashy's just sitting there being like, yeah, love that about you, right? So this to me is crazy that Dashy's actually like so good at the high level of the Valorant stuff. Of course, it's not in pro play in Valorant, it's more in like the actual like Radiant kind of division, effectively right at the top of ranked play, right? But still, Dashy's always mixing it up with the pros over there, and I do wonder what Dashy's thinking in terms of his career, because I mean, look, his COD career is probably going to continue for quite some time, but honestly, like he's been saying, like, I could be the 6th man for the OpTic Valorant team if the COD games get boring for Dashy, because like the last few years of COD have not been as good as they have been, right, in previous eras. Like he knows that, right? Yeah, I think he was kind of thinking, look, these new COD games are not quite as enjoyable to play as the recent ones were, and that's probably why he likes to play a lot of Valorant, right? I do wonder if there's a world in which, after a couple of seasons for Dashy and COD, whether he just decides to go to Valorant. If he can make that switch happen, I don't really know, but I think he could be a solid player in Valorant. Whether he could be one of the absolute best seems difficult to believe, but I mean, I don't know. If he put his full time into it, there may be different stories there. Like some of these COD kids, man, are just cracked at so many different games. Dashy is certainly an example of that one. But speaking of OpTic, actually, I thought there's some crazy numbers actually here that Round 11 Stats pointed out, mainly with Shotzzy topping the list, and we'll see Shotzzy here in a second. But this was the best S&D KD on a single map and side. So Shotzzy this season was had a 2.26 KD, 70 in 31 in terms of kills to death on Tuscan Attack. This is where he was at his absolute best. And Tuscan Attack is not a particularly easy side, to be honest, to have. Like we see that Spart has the second highest here with a 2.15 on Tuscan defense. So like, interesting really that Shotzzy and Spart had crazy numbers on that particular kind of, side combination. But on the attack to do this, and of course, Simp also has a 1.93 on Bakaj attack, which is interesting. But FaZe only won 46% of those rounds, whereas Shotzzy's dropping a 2.26 Tuscan attack. They're winning 67% of their rounds. They went 11 in 3 on the map overall. OpTic that season, they were pretty much the only team to actually find success on attack, and a large part of that came down to Shotzzy, finding the routes, finding the opening engagements. Like, that's just such an absurd number to have. On offense, Cellium also kind of rounding out the top 4 here with a 1.96 KD on defense Desert Siege. But I think by far the most impressive stat here is Shotzzy with his 2.26 on Tuscan attack. And they're going to say here that OpTic went 41 in 20 on Tuscan attack overall, miles better than any other team. Noticeable in this chart, I thought it was an interesting chart actually they came up with, and London kind of catching strays here, as he says, because they went 0 in 5 on Tuscan and didn't really like to play it too much. But yeah, look at this, right? So this is like OpTic's numbers here. You can see in terms of attack win percentage, like OpTic are pretty much top of the pile on round win. Like in terms of defense round win, OpTic are pretty much middle of the pack. But on offense round win, like this is like the league average, right? And you've got, of course, like the bars here showing the 25% quartiles, and then OpTic are way up here above everyone else in the league, which is kind of remarkable. And a large part of that came down to Shotzzy's impact on the offensive side of that map. And Pred seems to understand that very well indeed. He came up with a video doing his kind of SMG tier list. He doesn't give too many explanations opinions here into where he's putting which players, but I imagine a large part of this is pretty much just what he feels playing these guys. Like, of course, he's in scrims, he's in matches day in, day out, and he gets a feeling as to how good, how impactful these guys are on the other side, how difficult they are to deal with and stuff like that. Putting a lot of the big names up in the A tier, but the only S tier player that he goes for. And honestly, credit to Pred only putting one player here in the S tier, just because I feel like a lot of these lists nowadays have, like, you know, multiple teams of players up in the S tier, and to me it's like S is, you know, an absolute class above. There's one, maybe max two teams or players in the S tier for me, and you know, rather than just stacking it with a lot of the biggest names. So yeah, to me, I think Pred's done a solid here, and yeah, Shotzzy being his one S tier player though is pretty impressive.
But the Ant, I'll put Ant S. It was good. Even the Ant had like OpTic kind of was like they had so much going on. I'll chuck Ant S respectfully. He was good all majority of the year. Is there any SMG Benjamin Bance? I'll chuck Benjamin Bance and see.
So this is the list that he comes out with. I guess we can discuss it here. First of all, he puts himself and Mack down here in the F tier. Like, you know, to me, Pred was probably like the S tier player of this season, to be honest. But like, you know, excluding Pred from this one and his own analysis, he's gone for this. So in A tier, he goes for Simp and Kenny. Of course, at the end of the year, I suppose makes sense. Both of the tiny terrorists. Scump is here. Hydra, Kleenex as well. Then B tier, like Afro gets here. And I think, honestly, it's a pretty good list on the whole. Interesting, of course, to see, like, you know, guys like Vivid down in C tier. I think personally that does make sense, though. Vivid, a good player with lots of good aggression, but I think Pred probably, you know, maybe feels like, okay, maybe this guy isn't so impactful or difficult to play against as some of the other guys are on this list. So, I mean, yeah, honestly, pretty interesting. Like Neptune down here in D, Standy as well, of course, didn't have a great season. Like a Huke and a C both down here in the C tier, and Havok gets a B tier, and a Kismet as well is here. So, interesting list, I thought. Honestly, not a bad one at all. But Shotzzy being in a category of his own, I thought was interesting just because over the course of the entire season, Shotzzy was probably for quite some time the only SMG player in consideration for MVP. At the end of the season, I would say the only SMG player in consideration really was Pred after the end of the season he had. Maybe that's a bit of recency bias though, because Shotzzy did dominate the first part of the year. Mostly online, it must be said his online numbers were significantly better than his LAN numbers. But I mean, yeah, this is something kind of a phenomenon that we've seen in previous games with even the likes of Huke back in the day, when Huke was like a really top tier player. Back in, we're talking Advanced Warfare, and then coming into World War II, for example. Huke was a player that was always on the lips of the pro players. Everyone was talking about this guy, and the fans and the community was like, this Huke guy hasn't really achieved that much, especially during the World War II season, let's say, because at the start of World War II, the NV team that Huke was on didn't do particularly well. A lot of the community was like, these pros have been gassing up Huke for all this time, and yeah, he really hasn't achieved anything in his career. And even in Black Ops 4, things weren't so great, but then, you know, coming into Modern Warfare really was where Huke really showed and had a phenomenal year on that game, and of course won the World Championship that season. So, like, there's been some players, the likes of Huke, that pros rate incredibly highly, don't always have crazy results, but like, you know, pros realize how good these guys are and pretty much always want to team with them, right? And Shotzzy seems to be a guy that, like, every pro would want to team with. We even, of course, saw this from FaZe, right? Like, they have kind of made it clear that they wanted a leader for their team. Like, they obviously wanted to get rid of Arcitys. They've got Slasher in instead. But, like, and they decided, okay, we want a leadership role. But, like, I'm pretty sure, we believe at least, they reached out to Shotzzy because even if they could get, you know, even if they didn't have a proper leader, they were like, well, Shotzzy, we can happily sacrifice having, like, a traditional main AR leader in an Arcitys or a Slasher just so we can have Shotzzy, because Shotzzy is so highly valued. And if they could have got Shotzzy and Shotzzy decided to leave OpTic, then FaZe would have said, you know what, we'll make it work, right? We've got Shotzzy now, we can put Simp to the flex or Cell to the main or whatever, and whoever's going to do the IGLing, who cares? Because if we got Shotzzy, that's a difference maker, right? And I think a lot of pro teams feel like this way, where as soon as Shotzzy was a free agent, I'm sure that he was getting like every single team in the league in his DM saying like, well, look, I know you probably want to stay with OpTic, but you know, why not give it a go? So this guy, of course, at the start of the season was fantastic. Major 1, Major 2 especially had some absurd numbers here in that kind of online run that they had. His respawn numbers incredibly impressive, but to me it was his search and destroy that was an absolute difference maker for them this season. Honestly, over the course of the entire year, OpTic's respawn was nothing particularly special. Their control was great for a long period of time. Their hardpoint was never that good, in fairness. Their control was ridiculous. Like, that was their best game mode for the first part of the season, but then as the season progressed, they kind of regressed to the mean to some degree, and their control record at the end of the year wasn't particularly good as it turned out. So really, to me, it was their search and destroy that was the most impressive aspect of their game. We saw those numbers, of course, on Tuscan just a second ago, and Shotzzy was a massive part of that, right? And certainly was the case here in Stage 2. This is his full season as well, gets a 90 overall. Lots of green numbers here, but a 101 average damage per round in search and destroy. That's absolutely immense. Yes, he had a negative first blood rate, but kind of to be expected. The fact that he has a negative first blood rate, but is still doing incredibly well on situations like Tuscan attack is kind of incredible to me. And usually a lot of these first bloods, I'm sure that he's dying and are getting traded immediately as well. And one of the highest kill per round numbers in the entire game. So everyone kind of knows what Shotzzy, what Shotzzy can do, and every pro player seems to rate him incredibly highly. Of course, we did have a bit of a controversy really as the year progressed, where Shotzzy, okay, his LAN numbers weren't quite the same as online. Now, in fairness, I think in general your LAN numbers will usually be worse than online, just because on LAN you tend to play better teams. Because online you play a random selection of 5. When you go to LAN, if you win one series, you're probably playing like a top 4 team in the next round. If you win that series, you're probably playing a top 2 team. So the way the kind of tournaments work nowadays, your LAN KD is probably inclined to be worse. Like it was quite significantly worse, of course, for Shotzzy. There was a lot of talk about it as the season progressed, and his latter half of the year certainly wasn't as good as the start of the season. But Pred, from just playing against this guy, knows, okay, this guy was almost unplayable at times. When Shotzzy was on form, like this guy was practically unstoppable, it felt like, and I'm sure Pred felt like that in the server as well. Probably one of the reasons why he put him up in the S tier. So good, of course, that some plongers think this guy is cheating, and of course Hexer's giving this guy some exposure, but I thought the thumbnail was pretty funny in fairness. But yeah, what do you guys think about this, right? If you had to choose one SMG in the world to have on your roster, who are you going to have? Because Shotzzy and Scump, for a time this year, were like the best SMG duo, I think, in the entire game. Like after the iLLeY thing happened, both of them fell off to a certain extent, but with a full proper season, you might imagine that wouldn't necessarily be the case. And I mean, yeah, it's interesting, right? If you had to pick up, like if you were a team owner and you were coming in with, $100 million, and you could literally pick up any player you wanted and just pay them the money that they needed to get the buyout from the team or whatever the case might be, like is Shotzzy the first guy you get? Like, what's the ideal SMG duo in theory? Now, next season, of course, could be a different story, right? We know going into next year that, things can change, but Shotzzy, ever since he came into the league, has been disgusting. Of course, Modern Warfare, Shotzzy won the MVP of that season back in 2020, and of course, since then, Cold War was very good. Last year, Pred reckons he was, pretty much the S-tier SMG of the season, even above, Simp, aBeZy, and all these type of guys. Next game might be a different story, right? Of course, Cold War, like Shotzzy was definitely, behind the likes of Simp and aBeZy. The tiny terrors were ridiculous at that game, and it might be the same story going into this title, but, every team wants Shotzzy, and for good reason. Definitely intrigued to your thoughts on that in the comment section below. Just to finish off with this, actually, as the flank came out with, who is the most underrated Call of Duty player of all time? Interesting question, to be honest. I think there's some names that come to mind, even maybe the likes of Jerd, possibly from the European side. I think deserves, well, people don't really talk about him much at all, but I think he was a fantastic player in his day, most certainly. Let's look at the replies here, actually. So I think Enable actually probably is the best of the bunch, to be fair, because this guy never gets as much credit as he deserves, was the glue to many teams in COD history, has won plenty of events. The fact that he just subbed in for the OpTic Dynasty, won a couple of events with them before they got calm with the team, that was impressive. And of course, 100 Thieves back in Black Ops 4 on the Grapple Sorg, doing everything it took to win the event. Crowder as well might actually be a very good one, because of course, replays, as he was at the time when he won the World Championship in 2015, like, of course, since then he's been a coach, but honestly, replays has a really underrated career, Crowder, as he's called now. The fact that he went from being a player, won the World Championship, to then retiring, becoming the coach for FaZe, then making another return to FaZe in World War II, and then winning another event at the Stage 1 playoffs, like, that was incredibly impressive. And also, like, he's done so much for building up other players. Like, I think a lot of people consider Crowder to be their, like, Codfather in a sense, right? Giving them their shot in the league and actually making it big from there. So I think Crowder deserves a lot of credit. People talking, maybe even Classic, right, is a decent one to mention. Maybe Priest as well, Aqua, some names that are flying around. So, interesting one definitely to think of. Doug Sensimarson, of course, is another good answer, as he says in the replies right here. But very much intrigued to your thoughts on all this stuff in the comment section below. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did enjoy it, hit the like button, tell us a YouTube god, this is a good video. Others like you should see it as well, and help grow the competitive Call of Duty community. Thank you for watching as always, take care, and I'll see you next time.